Who's the stupidest person you ever met? And what story perfectly sums up their stupidity? Story 1. I knew this guy in high school who really thought his practical jokes were hilarious. He would just do stuff designed to piss you off, thinking your salty reaction would make it funny. You may be thinking this guy's a douche, and you'd be right. But he's also incredibly stupid because every time someone said, "Dude, effing chill out with your BS," he just blew it off as social stupidity. I guess, well, one day he knocked this kid's hat off his head. These guys were friends, but clearly there was some hostility. The other kid picks up his hat and tells the prankster to F off. The prankster smacks his head again. Other kid tells him if prankster knocks his hat off a third time, he'll knock prankster's head off. Prankster has a crap-eating grin, completely oblivious to how dead-beating serious this guy was, and gets absolutely clocked in the face when he F's with this guy's head a third time. All he could say was, "The F, man, chill out." But no one was willing to hear him out. Story 2. On a Friday at the start of exam week, Jim and the rest of the aircraft technician class had a review on electrical power. When the trainer asked Jim about the different types of batteries used on aircraft, Jim replied with AA, AAA, and C. When the class went to the hangar for work experience, the trainer lost faith in Jim, assigning everyone in the class a job except him, who was instead placed on an A4 sheet of paper on the ground so that it wouldn't blow away. Everyone, including Jim, laughed. Though the trainer's job was to try find ways to help Jim, it was clear that he'd given up. People like Jim had been known to act as paperweights, so it was not surprising that the trainer had elected to keep him in this position. Story 3. A guy I worked with named Buddy bought a huge Snap-on roll-away toolbox for a hefty price of over $3,000, even though he was unable to pay for it in cash. Just 2 days later, Buddy had to resort to selling the toolbox for a much lower price of $1,500 to one of his coworkers in order to pay for some overdue bills. We can assume he never paid Snap-on back for the purchases. After being fired for starting his fourth fight at work, Buddy just disappeared, leaving no trace of himself. His coworker, however, tipped off the Snap-on salesman about Buddy's new job, and it was said that his wages were being garnished as a result. This guy was something else. He had very thin skin, and the slightest thing could set him off. He also had a very foul temper when provoked. One time, he yelled at the security guard and threatened to get him fired due to his tone. He'd been almost fired 4 times by then, but somehow was able to persuade the department manager to keep him around until his 4th fight. Perhaps the weirdest thing he did was when he was told to put caution tape across a malfunctioning gate, and he replied with a simple, "Aye." Story 4. My ex-husband and I were playing a round of rock, paper, scissors to decide who had to change the baby. After I won the first 2 rounds with my paper and scissor throws, he stunningly proclaimed that rock beats everything. I was utterly baffled by this statement and spent a good 5 minutes trying to comprehend it. When I asked him for an explanation, his response was that it was all for fun. Sadly, he was not joking. I changed the baby in the end, and after that, I seemed to do most things regarding the baby. As for our intelligence, my son summed it up perfectly when he said to me at only 4 years old, "Daddy, you can't help. What's your excuse?" His words have stayed with me ever since. Story 5. One night during high school, my friend and I were invited to a wild and wacky party. Having no driver's license at the time, my friend picked me up and we were on our way. Everything went as expected, or so we thought. On the way back home, my friend was pulled over by a police officer. As he pulled to the side of the road, I told him I was going to pretend to be asleep since I was only the passenger. I heard the officer get out of his car and walk up to the window, but I heard no talking or movement. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to open my eyes to see what was going on. To my surprise, I find my friend still pretending to be asleep alongside me. It turns out that the guy driving was an idiot, but at least he was quick on his feet. Story 6. In a third-year developmental psychology course, a student raised his hand in a crowded lecture hall and asked the professor an odd question. Do infants diagnosed with SIDS have an increased risk of developing asthma later in life? The professor was perplexed by the query, unable to comprehend why the student had posed such an inquiry. Just as tensions began to rise amongst the students, a brave soul in the back of the room shouted out the answer. No, infants who have passed away due to SIDS are not at risk for developing asthma. In a stroke of irony, this was the same student who sat in front of me all semester, writing the most dismal poetry and song lyrics imaginable. It is a peculiar feeling to be in a college classroom where one individual appears to be completely confused while everyone else stares in disbelief. The teacher tries to comprehend the reasoning behind the student's question, yet no one can make head or tails of it. Ultimately, it is up to another student to come to the rescue and provide the answer. Story 7. My husband and I had a rental property manager assigned to us by the homeowners, who lived out of state. She constantly did things that annoyed us, and we thought she was being greedy and taking money for herself. To make matters worse, when we had repairs, shady things seemed to occur that made us think she was hiding money from the homeowners. To give an example of her poor judgment, when we mentioned gardening, she suggested growing tomatoes and watering them with salt water so they would be salty when eaten. It certainly serves as a huge reminder that one should never attribute to malice what is merely a sign of stupidity. Story 8. There was a troubled kid I went to high school with who was beginning to go down a difficult path, experimenting with drugs and making poor decisions. One of his more unusual choices was to photocopy a $20 bill, cut it out of normal paper, and then glue the two halves together with Elmer's glue. He then decided to test his homemade money at a gas station. And to his surprise, it actually worked. He thought that this meant his money was foolproof, so he took it to a bank to deposit it. Needless to say, it didn't work, and he was arrested. I don't know where he is now, but I can only imagine the types of choices he's making. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day. Story 9. Roxanne Rocky was a manager with a unique look. She had bleached blonde hair, which she bleached every single month, and it caused her hair to break and fall out. But it wasn't her work that got her the job, it was her daddy who owned the restaurant. She was always so worried about her looks, but one day she mentioned something that made my coworker and I stop and look at each other in disbelief. She informed us that she had a nose job, so her eventual children wouldn't have the same nose as her. We just walked away knowing that it wasn't worth engaging in the conversation. Maybe she was ahead of the times and the surgery was part of some revolutionary gene-altering science that would give her children perfect noses. Despite making this comment to spite those who wish I didn't comment, I can't even remember what this story was about. Story 10. I had the misfortune of meeting my friend's Uncle Frankie once when I was growing up. My buddy and I used to work at his father's insurance office over the summer months. On one particular day when the year was 2009, Uncle Frankie came in to use a computer to write an email. When he tried to add the @ symbol to the recipient's name, he asked me where it was. I told him to press the Shift and number 2 keys simultaneously. However, he seemed to be confused and asked if it wouldn't make a capital T. Story 11. For a month, I was working on a hay press with a group of individuals who had primarily high school educations. One particular guy began speaking to me about a girl he was chatting with on a dating/chatting app. His interest in her was so strong that he wanted to visit her in New York. I thought it was interesting and told him that his travels would be quite a change from our small town. He then asked me how close New York was, having no concept that it was over 2,000 miles away from Washington State. Story 12. My old coworker James and I were both 16 when we worked at McDonald's. One day, an impulsive and seemingly random move, James began chasing customers around the lobby with a mop, screaming, "I'm going to get you!" Needless to say, he was immediately fired, and our time at McDonald's was cut short. While I wouldn't recommend his actions, I must admit that it was a pretty funny story, and James may have been wiser than I originally thought.